Yeah, I was scared. I'm not gonna lie.
Police officer shot in the line of duty, and a police chief proud of the men and women on his force.
They don't make excuses, they make a difference. And what you saw today with these officers showing that they have the courage, the guts, and the perseverance to do what they need to do to keep this community safe.
Houston PD Chief Art Acevedo just a few hours ago. I'm Doug Dunbar. Thanks for being with us. We got so much to get to from Houston tonight. This is where 4 officers were shot in a narcotics raid earlier this evening.
One of those officers who was shot in the shoulder is out of the hospital and resting at home tonight.
We have a lot to tell you this evening, and we are covering all the angles from the tip that led investigators to the house to what we know about the brave officers themselves.
We start with Brett Buffington. He's at the house on Harding Street in Southeast Houston with the very latest tonight. Brett?
And Lynn, tonight here, Harding Street is still shut down. The home where this shooting happened is lit up, and in front of it tonight, a mobile police command center. We now know 18 police officers were tasked with serving a warrant at that home today. 12 of those officers undercover. The suspects inside suspected of dealing black tar heroin. Houston's police chief tonight says the man started shooting as soon as the officers opened the door. In fact, the chief says one of those suspects ran to the back of the home, then came back and started shooting again. 4 of the officers hit by bullets. A 5th hurt while trying to avoid being shot. The 2 suspects, they died here at this home, shot and killed by Houston police officers. Tonight, it is the beginning of what is sure to be a lengthy investigation.
Our job is to keep people safe in our city. And I want to be very clear is that, we do not tolerate any sort of activity, whether it's drug activity, drug trafficking, whether it's whatever it may be. We don't tolerate it in our city.
We've had a lot of information coming into our newsroom, so we're doing this Verify segment to make things really easy to read and get right to the point. The first one, 5 officers injured. HPD has confirmed that information. 4 shot, 1 injured while running. He was injured in the knee. The next one is that 2 suspects have been killed in this case. Also, according to HPD, they were serving a drug search warrant. Now for this middle section, an area where we're still working to get more information, and that's the officers' names. One more piece of information, suspect information. We know a little bit, but there's a lot more to learn to understand what happened today.
The hail of gunfire that officers were involved in began to ring out just after 4 p.m. today. This was a residential area just southeast of downtown Houston proper.
Shortly before 5 o'clock, the narcotics officers attempted to serve a search warrant on the location at 7800 Hardy Street. They announced themselves as Houston police officers while simultaneously breaching the front door of the residence. Immediately upon breaching the door, the officers came under fire from 1 or 2 suspects inside the house. We're not sure how many of the suspects fired this time. As you can imagine, it was a pretty chaotic scene over there, and the investigation's unfolding. 2 suspects were struck by return gunfire by members of the Houston Police Department. Those suspects, once we were able to render the scene safe by SWAT, were pronounced deceased at the scene from the return gunfire from the officers. Our eyes and ears are truly the community that we serve. We could not do what we do without the community we serve.
This evening's horrific attack on police officers is a solemn reminder of the service and sacrifice our brave men and women in law enforcement make every day to keep us safe. The city of Houston and the Houston Police Department will have whatever state resources they need to bring swift justice to those involved. The hashtag Pray for HPD is trending nationwide tonight, and some of Houston's biggest names are lending their support. Houston Texan star J.J. Watt retweeted HPD saying, thinking about the officers involved and hoping everyone is going to be all right.
This all began because a neighbor had the courage to say, we're not going to put up. We think that they're dealing dope out of this house. Was able to actually determine that narcotics dealing, street-level narcotics dealing, black tar heroin was being dealt out of this, and we know the poison that's killing so many kids, not only here in Houston, but around the country. They immediately started an investigation, and that's what they were there tonight. They don't make excuses, they make a difference. And what you saw today with these officers showing that they have the courage, the guts, and the perseverance to do what they need to do to keep this community safe.
Passion and anger.
We are sick and tired of having targets on our back. We are sick and tired of having dirtbags trying to take our lives when all we're trying to do is protect this community and protect our families. Enough is enough.
5 Houston officers injured, 4 of them shot. Among them, a 54-year-old officer already shot twice in the line of duty. In 1991, then again in 93, and today, a third time.
This man is 54 years old. He's the case agent on this case, and he was there in the front lines. If that doesn't tell you about the heart of the men and women we have the privilege to lead, I don't know what will.
Despite the heartache in Houston tonight, the department vows that this will not stop the mission of protecting and serving. But the targeting of officers has to stop.
We've had enough, folks. We're out there doing our jobs every day, putting our lives on the line for our families. Enough is enough.
From New York City's police chief, Terrence Monahan, he tweeted, Houston police need the prayers and support of their brothers and sisters in blue and all Americans during this terrible attack. New York police stand with you, Houston.
And our thoughts here at KHU11 News are with the officers and their families tonight. It has been quite an ordeal and quite a day. We'll be right back.
Well, guys, this morning, 2 of those officers remain in critical condition. We don't know much about them because they're undercover cops. What we do know is that these men were just doing their jobs and trying to protect their communities.
Drug raid that went sideways, ending with 4 narcotics officers being shot in Houston. Tonight, the police union president called the suspects dirtbags and said police are tired of having targets on their backs. Reporter Chris Martinez on how the shootout unfolded.
We have multiple officers shot. Houston police officers came under gunfire Monday afternoon while serving a drug search warrant in a residential neighborhood. Police say 2 officers sustained gunshot wounds to the neck.
They're still in the house. We have the house surrounded.
2 suspects were killed, officials say, and police used 2 robots to search the home in the aftermath.
I was at my house, and all of a sudden I heard like 6-7 shots go off, pop, 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 and then a small breather, and then another 6-7 shots go out.
You just don't expect it. It's crazy. You don't expect things like that. And just pray for their families and everything. It's sad.
And a 5th officer was injured as they raided a suspected drug den. 2 of the officers are in critical but stable condition.
Investigators have now released the names of 2 suspects killed when police returned fire. Dennis Tuttles and Regine Nichols. They were found dead when the shooting stopped.
59-year-old Dennis Tuttles and 58-year-old Regina Nicholas. Now, police say the 2 attacked police with gunfire and by releasing a dog on them as those police officers were trying to make entry into the house, which was being raided by the undercover narcotics officers. They believe that drugs were being sold inside of that house, so they were going in with a warrant. Now, police say those were the only 2 suspects that were inside the house. They tell us they found drugs and they found guns once they did get inside.
So a neighbor's tip is what led police to this house, and they say that as officers approached that front door, the 2 suspects inside started shooting.
The first officer shot was the first man to enter the house yesterday, according to Chief Acevedo. Armed with a shotgun, he made it past the front threshold, police say, before he was shot in the shoulder.
Just passed a note to one of us, one of our officers that said, I had to get in there because I knew my guys were down. And that just speaks volumes as to this man and just his courage under fire.
With the courage needed to fight, also a call for extra support for the 4th officer shot, whose family asked for privacy.
We just need the community's prayers for him and his family. Well, everybody has a family, and our condolences goes out to the suspects. I mean, at the end of the day, you engage police officers and you start shooting at police officers, they're going to shoot back, but that's somebody's loved one, and we send our thoughts out to the families. Let me just tell you where we're at with our investigation. Our investigation continues. I want to provide you a little detail of what we've uncovered so far as to how we ended up at 7815 Harding, but I promise you that, as you saw on the affidavit, that we were at the right house based on our investigation to that point. On January 8th, 2019, patrol officers in the East Side Division of the Houston Police Department received and a call and were dispatched for service at 7815 Harding regarding a suspicious person. The caller wanted to remain anonymous, but stated her daughter was inside the residence, quote, doing drugs, and they have a lot of guns in the residence. A female was walking down the street while talking on a phone. Officers asked her if she had called the police. She explained that she did not. Then into the phone, she stated we were right in front of that house in 815. She stated to whoever she was talking to, hey, the police are at the dope house. The officers called the anonymous caller on the phone number listed in the call slip. She stated she did not want to give any information because they were drug dealers and they would kill her. She wanted the officers to go into the house and get her daughter. One of the officers explained that the officers really cannot go into the house at that time. This is the patrol officers. The officer wrote a detailed note within the call slip history to document their actions, what they had learned, and what they had done. Again, this happened on the first call was on January 11th when we responded. Patrol provides the information to the lieutenant and narcotics, lieutenant 3 days later orders the initiation of an investigation. On January 27th, the case agent utilized a confidential informant to make a controlled buy at the residence. I know that one of the outstanding questions by the community and by the media is, has that substance been tested? And the answer is yes. Has been confirmed to be heroin by the Houston Forensic Science Center. The search warrant was obtained, and we all know that on January 28th, the case agent presented a search warrant with an affidavit for the residence to Harris County Magistrate Gordon C. Markham II, the presiding judge of Houston Municipal Court number 13. He signed the warrant at about 13:37, and a tactical plan was put together. On the night of the incident and the search warrant, investigators did find small amounts of what we now have confirmed through tests of marijuana and also of cocaine in the residence from that day, and we also recovered the firearms that I previously reported on. It's important because one of the things that a lot of people are asking is, hey, how about these dynamic search warrants? What are the pros and cons? Are they dangerous? And the answer is, anytime you enter a home, whether it's a dynamic or not, it's dangerous. I mean, there's no getting around it. Police work is dangerous. But at the end of the day, like I told Mr. Tuttle, we've taken the lives of 2 people, and we have to conduct extensive investigation. It's just what we do. It's the nature of our business. And so when we're done with that, we'll be able to report back to the community. Any questions, anything that I left out up to this point from anybody?
You just addressed, Chief, about, there's 2 sides to YouTube page, party, and obviously the warrant says differently, and all these...
The warrant says what?
There's... I don't know if you're aware, but there's a gentleman who's been on YouTube a lot.
Look, listen, you're talking about conspiracy theorists. We deal with facts at the Houston Police Department.
I guess my question to you is, what do you say to members of the community? Because there are some out there who are tending to believe that. They're like,
you know what? There's people that believe the Earth is flat. I can't control what they think. What I can control is the quality of my investigation. What I can control is how extensive our investigation is, and what I can control at the back end is being transparent so people can decide for themselves. I can tell you, we've already pulled body-worn camera from the initial contact from patrol. We don't leave any stone unturned, and if you know anything about me as an investigator, as a leader, I'm a dogged SOB. I'd leave no stone unturned. It's important for people to know I lead the department. Let me finish. This is my press conference, and we'll talk later. That's the one thing I want to get out there right off the bat. Secondly, these men and women here work tirelessly leading the folks that we lead, and quite frankly, our men and women work tirelessly building the relationship that we've built.
What can you tell us about him being relieved of duty? I mean, when did it happen, and why you're not, and what are the circumstances?
I can't confirm exactly when he was relieved of duty or what the circumstances are. Obviously it's an ongoing investigation, and we're going to have to let it take its course.
Does it give you some measure of
pause or concern given the high-profile nature of this incident, given all the social media rumors that have been swirling out there that Chief Acevedo has already addressed? You know, this was an officer connected to, you know, a search warrant that ended in a deadly shootout.
You know, whenever we have a high-profile case like this, the rumor mill always gets going, and people have theories and different things. But the fact of the matter is, we still have yet to speak to the case agent because he is in the hospital incapacitated. And until we speak to the case agent, I think it would be impossible for anyone to really draw any conclusions about another officer being relieved of duty. But sometimes they relieve them because they just don't want people talking around the station house or other things that go on, and nobody should read too much into simply someone being relieved of duty.
Our information that we just published is that one focus of the investigation centers around the purported controlled buy, which according to the search warrant occurred a day before officers moved in on Harding Street, and that there are questions about the validity of the purported controlled buy. The mere fact that there's questions surrounding that is a serious issue, is it not?
Well, you know, it's impossible for us to know until we have spoken to that case agent who is currently incapacitated at the hospital because he was shot in the face. And until we can get a statement from him, it's impossible to glean anything from this person being relieved of duty.
Does it seem to, like, from what we've been told, it centers around the fact that perhaps they did not do their due diligence leading up to getting this no-knock warrant?
You know, I think it's impossible to know if the due diligence was done until we have spoken to the case agent who is currently incapacitated at the hospital. Until we get a statement from him, I think it's impossible to glean anything from this person being relieved of duty. No, accountability is important. We always have to make sure we get to the bottom of every single officer-involved shooting that we get into, and I'm certain that we're going to get to the bottom of this one as soon as the case agent is able to give a statement and clarify some of the things that are going on right now and some of the rumors that are out there.
A Channel 2 investigation uncovers documents revealing this raid was the result of a flawed investigation.
The records read like a TV police drama, a fabricated search warrant, criminal informants who say they've never even been to that house, and 2 dead homeowners.
Houston's police chief promising tonight that HPD is investigating its own.
We're going to get to the truth, and we will report back the good, the bad, and the ugly.
This is the major headline Channel 2 was first to uncover. It now appears one or more officers lied to a judge to obtain the warrant to raid that home.
And that's where 5 officers were wounded and 2 homeowners were shot and killed in a bloody gun battle.
Jonathan, I don't think there's any question this case is unraveling for HPD, and these new sworn statements paint just a nasty picture in terms of what was going on behind the scenes before this raid ever happened. First uncovered by Channel 2 Investigates Friday morning, it's now crystal clear that botched drug raid at this Southeast Houston home in January was unlawful, illegal, and now big trouble for HPD, given the 2 homeowners were shot and killed by police. Problem number 1, the confidential informant. There really wasn't one. An officer appears to have lied to the judge to get the warrant. If there's no confidential informant, there's no warrant, there's no raid.
Absolutely.
Quote, interviewed all of the confidential informants and all denied making a buy for Goins, that's the HPD case agent, at 7815 Harding Street, and ever purchasing narcotics from Regina Nicholas or Dennis Tuttle. Nicholas and Tuttle are the dead homeowners killed in the shootout with police. Gerald Goins was the HPD narcotics officer in charge of the operation. He's still in the hospital, but 2 new search warrant applications now target his phone, as well as the phone of another officer.
The penal code has created a specific offense for rogue cops who believe that they can break the rules and perjure themselves in presenting a search warrant affidavit to a magistrate.
It gets even stickier because found inside Goins' city vehicle was unlocked heroin. That appears to be from an under-the-table transaction a few days earlier. Apparently, a real informant did make that buy. Quote, Officer Goins had him or her do a buy from a house on Napoleon Street. Officer Goins returned to pick up the bags of heroin approximately 6 hours later. You have got to wonder why heroin was brought from one scene to another scene, two scenes that seemingly have no connection.
Channel 2 investigator Mario Diaz joining us live with what the police chief had to say about the documents that we uncovered. Mario?
Lauren, you reference those documents. They're right here. When Channel 2 Investigates got our hands on these documents this morning and read the affidavit carefully, we realized that Chief Art Acevedo and HPD had a full scandal on its hands. The main reason because of the officers who are alleged to have lied before and after that controversial shooting, which forced Acevedo today to go on the defensive about what was being said.
Thus far, it appears that there are some material untruths or lies in that affidavit, and that's a problem.
A real problem for HPD Chief Art Acevedo. It's already resulted in one narcotics officer being relieved of duty following last month's raid on Harding Street. Channel 2 Investigates has now learned from a ranking HPD source another HPD narcotics officer involved in the raid will likely be relieved of duty this weekend.
Man who had a past run-in with the officers who have been involved in this and come under scrutiny told us today those officers terrorized his neighborhood. January shootout inside that home on Harding led to the killings of drug suspects Dennis Tuttle and his wife Regina Nichols. Days later, it was revealed that some of the details of this case were fabricated in order to justify the search warrant. Well, two officers are now under investigation along with hundreds of cases they worked on over their careers.
Hey there, we're talking about a widening probe of more than 2,000 cases, and every day we're hearing about different defendants. And today it was a court appearance for just another man charged with another drug crime, but he says he did not do it. We want to show you what it looked like this morning when he walked into the courtroom. We're talking about the man. This is Paul Collins. He was arrested last year, allegedly, in a search warrant involving questioned and troubled Houston police officers Stephen Bryant and Gerald Goins. He was charged with a drug crime, something he says he did not do. Now, his charges have not been dismissed. He had a regular court appearance today. They reset the case, but given what's taken place, there could be big changes to his case. He's hoping this case gets dismissed. In fact, he told us he's been waiting for the media to get to him.
Well, I was waiting on you guys to get to me, to let me know that, these guys are bad cops. I've been waiting on it. It's a blessing right now that you guys put me, in front of me right now talking about the story. But it's happened to a lot of young men in the Fifth Ward community.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is what we have been reporting over the past month and a half as we talk to defendant after defendant. It is clear these stories are not unique. We're talking about hundreds, if not potentially thousands of cases that now come under question. Reviewing it in the interest of justice for the district attorney's office will take quite some time.
New at 10 o'clock tonight, in the minutes following the deadly raid on Harding Street, Channel 2 Investigates began asking questions, and they haven't stopped investigating since.
Tonight, another new angle. Channel 2 Investigates the sequence of events leading up to the botched raid. Police Chief Art Acevedo said the raid stemmed from an incident at the home 20 days earlier, but what do we really know about that night?
Channel 2 investigator Mario Diaz uncovers the changing narrative.
January 28th, late afternoon. HPD's airwaves are filled with deadly drama.
11844, we're going to be at 7815 Harding, 7815 Harding.
Units responding to a then unknown address that has since become notorious for the department.
Because we had a search warrant that narcotics activity was going on in that residence, specifically the sale of black tar heroin.
Hours after 4 officers were shot, a married couple killed, HPD Chief Art Acevedo addressed the city.
This all began because a neighbor had the courage to say, we're not going to put up. We think that they're dealing dope out of this house.
Days later, the story shifted that the caller was an anonymous mother who dialed 911 on January the 8th.
The caller wanted to remain anonymous, but said her daughter was inside the residence, quote, doing drugs, and they have a lot of guns in the residence.
After Channel 2 Investigates first revealed lying cops manufactured the unlawful warrant, Chief Acevedo remained steadfast on one aspect.
It's really important for the community to realize we still had a reason to be at that home. We should not draw final conclusions, as disturbing as it is, until we uncover every single investigative lead.
Chief, you indicated you had reason to be at that home. There appears to be no reason listed in this affidavit.
But to remember, the affidavit is but one piece of a very comprehensive investigation.
What do we know about January 8th, the date that triggered all of this? We know that a 911 call was made. HPD declined to turn it over.
Yes, I'm not sure if we're on District 2. It's 7813 Harding Street.
However, Channel 2 Investigates uncovered HPD's dispatch audio.
Wants to remain anonymous, advised of this location. There's possibly doing drugs and drugs inside the residence. Indicates her daughter is also possibly in there.
During the call, officers reference a call slip.
What's the details in the call slip? Daughter is at the location. She possibly thinks there's drugs, guns inside the residence. She wants to remain anonymous. She just called back again asking ETA.
The call ultimately ended up empty.
The police arrive at the location and knock on the door. They won't answer, but she wants her daughter arrested.
Days after the botched raid, Chief Acevedo referenced the call slip multiple times.
The officers called the anonymous caller on the phone number listed in the call slip. The officer wrote a detailed note within the call slip history to document their actions, what they had learned, and what they had done.
But there is no detailed note. HPD provided Channel 2 Investigates with the January 8th call slip. HPD confirming the call slip has no narrative. They also confirm no police report was filed. Yet off one 911 call and this slip, HPD Narcotics went all in.
Patrol provides the information to the lieutenant and narcotics, lieutenant 3 days later orders the initiation of an investigation.
Since the night of the deadly shooting, there's been a changing storyline, but the facts show that cops lied and people died.
Right now at 10, a first look inside 7815 Harding Street.
Bullet holes inside of the kitchen, just part of the storyline.
The family of the couple killed during that botched HPD raid, inviting Channel 2 Investigates into the home where it all went down.
You're going to tell me he's capable of doing what they're saying he did?
The families of deceased couple Dennis Tuttle and his wife Regina, along with their attorneys, providing the first look to Channel 2 Investigates.
What was your initial reaction when you stepped inside and saw this?
It's disgusting that the police would come in and do that to two people and their dog.
Cliff Tuttle, Dennis's uncle, and I spoke in the kitchen for several minutes. Walls beside us, along with a stovetop, were littered with bullet holes. And those were the low-flying ones.
Look at that. A man 5'6". What are they shooting at? He's not on a chair. He's standing, he's probably this tall. Who are they shooting at? Why?
There were other high-flying bullet holes. Who fired them is the key question the FBI, the Harris County District Attorney's Office, and HPD is trying to identify. Today, the other side weighed in.
Do you feel that the cops had a reason to be inside this home?
No. Definitely not. I think the FBI and the district attorney can come up with a good report.
Do you trust HPD with their investigation?
Not totally.
I didn't sleep last night trying to figure out what it was going to see.
John Nicholas says he came to the home for some answers into his sister's death. Reality was much different than expectations.
I really didn't expect to see as many bullet holes and stuff like that, and some of the stuff that was destroyed.
After nearly 100 days after the botched raid, we have learned that the couple died inside of their home of multiple gunshot wounds. Eric Davis is the Felony Trial Division Chief at the Harris County Public Defender's Office. As an attorney who's tried many homicide cases over the last 25 years, he's seen his share of autopsy reports.
The head, the neck, the left forearm, he was shot all over.
Davis is looking at the medical examiner's report of 59-year-old Dennis Tuttle, who was shot 9 times during the botched raid in January. The 51-page report shows illustrations of multiple bullet wounds after the couple was shot and killed inside their Southeast Houston home on Harding Street. During the shooting, 58-year-old Regina Nicholas suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the chest and thigh, along with bullet fragment wounds to the leg. In a statement, her family's attorney says in part, quote, the autopsy report confirms a growing list of troubling questions about the conduct and claims of HPD before, during, and after the out-of-control and unjustified attack. The attorney for Dennis Tuttles' family says in part, quote, we probably have more questions today than we did yesterday, and the family is reeling from this report. They knew Dennis as a peaceful, nonviolent, and loving man. This report only increases their concerns about why the police came to his house and shot him and his wife like this.
The FBI is now involved as HPD's own internal investigation drags into its 4th month. And last Thursday, we were first to report that the autopsy results for Dennis Tuttle and Regina Nicholas.
Tonight, investigator Mario Diaz reveals allegations of uncollected evidence at the home on Harding Street.
Regina Nicholas and Dennis Tuttle are dead. Members of HPD's narcotics team have left the force or are under investigation. And Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo still has not turned over the case to the District Attorney's Office for review.
And let me tell you why I think these cops are heroes.
On January 28th, it was chaos on Harding Street. Within the first few hours, HPD brass raced in front of cameras, attempting to defend their officers, not knowing what had really happened.
Because we had a search warrant that narcotics activity was going on in that residence, specifically the sale of black tar heroin.
The next morning, Chief Acevedo continued to build the narrative.
We actually bought black tar heroin at that location.
The couple portrayed as drug dealers without fear of the law.
A male suspect came from around the back and started an open fire with a .357 Magnum. A female suspect went towards that officer, reached over the officer, and started making a move for his shotgun.
On January 31st, Chief Acevedo revealed HPD's narcotics division began an investigation after officers responded to a 911 call outside the home weeks earlier.
The officer wrote a detailed note within the call slip history to document their actions, what they had learned, and what they had done.
Our investigation revealed the officer's call slip had no details, and no police report was actually filed after that 911 call. But the story behind the raid really fell apart the morning of February 15th.
Channel 2 investigates, learning this morning there are big problems.
Documents revealed lying cops manufactured an unlawful warrant, giving officers the green light to go in without knocking. Hours after we broke the story, Chief Acevedo doubled down on his department's actions.
It's really important for the community to realize we still had a reason to be at that home. We should not draw final conclusions, as disturbing as it is, until we uncover every single investigative lead.
Chief, you indicated you had reason to be at that home. There appears to be no reason listed in this affidavit.
But to remember, that affidavit is but one piece of a very comprehensive investigation.
5 days later, the FBI gets involved.
They have opened a formal civil rights investigation.
District Attorney Kim Ogg's office also is investigating and announced it's reviewing more than 2,200 cases tied to the case agent, Gerald Goings, and fellow narcotics officer, Stephen Bryant. One key answer desired: why does Chief Art Acevedo feel that officers still had reason to be in the home if lying cops manufactured a warrant? To this day, no reason has been presented. Meanwhile, narcotics officers Gerald Goings and Stephen Bryant retired after being relieved of duty. Also relieved of duty, Angel August, an officer involved in the internal investigation. HPD says Mental Health Division Commander William Staney will be taking over narcotics. It is all part of a department-wide shuffle.
We've been uncovering new details about the botched HPD raid. We have learned that a private forensic team was at that home conducting its own examination.
This has been the focus for the families of Dennis Tuttle and Regina Nicholas, as well as their attorneys.
Amen.
Chuck Bork is a representative of the Nicholas family.
We don't know what happened on the day that this went down. We don't know.
Today, an attempt by the families to get concrete answers as Michael Maloney, a former senior instructor at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center for Death Investigations and Sex Crimes, was at the home with his team to investigate with detailed scrutiny.
From what our experts are telling us, there's still some bullet fragments, there's still some bullets. There's a lot of evidence remaining.
Maloney and his forensic team plan to comb the entire home through the weekend.
Information we've found seems to contradict the official version of what supposedly happened.
After months of review, the Houston Police Department says it has completed its investigation into the botched Harding Street drug raid, and it's turning over the findings to the DA's office. The news comes just days after we first took you inside the home as private forensic teams uncovered new evidence in the case.
Unanswered questions publicly are being answered privately today. The report is not being commented on in great detail, nor are any portions being released to the public by HPD. I am told it is lengthy, hundreds of pages long by one law enforcement official. The Houston Police Department has completed the criminal investigation and the officer-involved shooting investigation. The Houston Police Department has cooperated fully with the DA's office and the FBI throughout the investigations and provided all information that has been requested. Now, an HPD spokesperson was unable to answer whether or not HPD provided a copy of their completed investigation today to the FBI.
15 new criminal felony charges in the ongoing investigation of the Harding Street no-knock narcotics raid on January 28, 2019. Squad 15 Sergeant, he's been charged with 3 tampering with government record felony crimes. Gonzalez held a position of trust and was required to verify and authorize any expenditures over a $2,500 amount. And finally, Officer Haji Armstrong, not with Squad 15, but a close associate of Gerald Goins, who retired almost immediately following Harding Street. One charge of tampering with the government record, an offense report, state jail felony. Those we charged with felony tampering lied routinely on governmental records, such as confidential informant payouts. They intentionally circumvented important checks and balances in HPD's narcotic enforcement general orders. In fact, payouts made by Goins and Armstrong separately to confidential informants were not witnessed by the officers or supervisors who claimed to do so. The money may have been paid, stolen, or split with the informant. What we do know is that the rules were intentionally cast aside by the charged police supervisors. In addition to lying on the fatal Harding Street warrant, Gerald Goins lied on at least 3 other search warrants, resulting in the arrests and charging of 3 people. While they were not killed, they were wrongfully arrested and incarcerated. Like former Officer Stephen Bryant, former Officer Armstrong also lied by placing false information in offense reports to cover other falsehoods. Stephen Bryant tried to cover for Gerald Goins by entering false information into an offense report after the Harding Street killings. Lieutenant Gonzalez held the highest rank and therefore the greatest position of trust, because he was supposed to verify that the contraband his officers collected, paid informants for, and filed charges on were actually the illegal cocaine, meth, and heroin that the officers said they were. He intentionally did not do this. He ignored these duties, and he authorized thousands of dollars in drug informant payouts to the charged officers against and in violation of his own general orders. In fact, what's clear is that none of this could have happened without the supervisor's help. That's why the crimes themselves are not one-offs. This is not a case of individual rogue officers. This is what the law calls a pattern and practice or an ongoing scheme. The motive was money. Some will say that this scheme is just mismanagement. It is not. It is long-running evidence of graft and corruption that can literally rot an institution from the inside out. As the chief prosecutor in this county, here's what I have to say to those who would call these nonviolent crimes or one-offs or mismanagement. Lying and stealing are always wrong. But when public servants lie and steal, it impacts everyone in the criminal justice system, from controller to judge to district attorney. We rely on the very documents that these officers lied on. We rely upon them to make critical decisions, decisions to pay tax dollars for police overtime, decisions to sign search warrants, giving the government the power to forcibly enter civilians' homes, decisions to charge people with crimes that carry lifelong consequences. To say these officers abused the public trust is a gross understatement. The lies that these former police officers are charged with making had a monetary benefit. They profited, to be sure, but their lies had a profoundly negative impact and an unknown cost on the minority communities of Houston, who have long been overrepresented targets in drug enforcement. I have a message for every former peace officer charged. You did not deserve to wear the badge, which is pledged to protecting the very communities and people you harmed. Had Harding Street not gone terribly wrong, had the neighbors not cried out that the victims were regular people and not, in fact, drug dealers, had Dennis Tuttle and Regina Nicholas lived instead of died, then judges and prosecutors like me, even jurors, would be in the usual position, measuring the word of a sworn police officer against a civilian charged with a small amount of drugs.
And we begin with video you'll see only on 2 tonight. Investigators with the Texas Rangers and the District Attorney's Office going in and out of a high-profile home in Southeast Houston. It's the Harding Street home, where nearly 6 months ago, 2 homeowners were shot and killed in a flawed HPD drug raid.
Well, the Texas Rangers spent several hours there today using some high-tech tools to scan the house. One particular focus, the potential trajectory of the bullets fired into and inside the house, and we know there were a lot of bullets fired.
You might recall a private forensic investigator that was hired by the families extracted nearly 10 bullets back in May.
This is the second time in approximately 3 months that you've had people out here investigating the trajectory of bullets that were fired inside of this botched raid, only this time it was being done by law enforcement. Investigators from the Harris County District Attorney's Office and the Texas Rangers worked outside and inside of 7815 Harding Street today. The presence of Rangers comes nearly 3 months after they were initially offered access to the home by the families of Regina Nicholas and Dennis Tuttle. The Rangers turned down the first invite to look at the evidence collected by a private forensic investigator, Michael Maloney. Channel 2 Investigates was there in May, chronicling Maloney's extensive efforts. And we were here today as the Rangers did their work.
The fact that he did such a good job, I think, is really helpful.
Do you think they would have been doing this today had it not been for what you and your team uncovered inside of that home in May?
I think it was definitely... I know that the District Attorney's Office wanted to make sure that they reach out to us based on what Michael Maloney and his team found, and I think it's a good step that they did.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today on behalf of the family of Regina Nicholas.
The reason the family has taken this step is because their investigation to date, especially with the assistance of a forensic scientist, Michael Maloney, has given us 4 particular developments that we want to share with you today.
For his botched Harding Street drug raid.
Yeah, the family's attorneys claim that a private forensic investigator has found Regina Nicholas was shot from outside of her home. Matt Doherty, that definitely contradicts what police say happened that day.
What Michael Maloney has confirmed the physical evidence instead shows is that Regina Nicholas was shot by someone outside the house, firing through a wall where she could not be seen. And that's confirmed not just by the ballistics reconstruction, but by also DNA testing that corresponded the bullet recovered with what the Institute of Forensic Science of Harris County found during the autopsy. The second item is that something we'd already seen initially that caused the family to question the story that had been put out by the city was that 30 minutes after the supposed big gun battle was done, there were 2 lone gunshots, and we have some physical evidence that indicates what that might be. Somebody took a gun at some point, likely long after Dennis Tuttle was dead, at least based on the physical evidence, and went into an inside wall and fired 2 shots into a wall. That's also been documented by gunpowder residue physical chemical tests directed by Mr. Maloney. And the fourth development is that we now know that while the police department was telling its citizens in the world repeatedly that this was a known drug house, a black tar heroin drug house run by Regina Nicholas and her husband. At the same time, we now have internal documents that indicates while they were saying that, they had every reason to know that just was not true. Regina Nicholas was shot by an officer standing outside to the right of the front door, firing through the wall and actually striking her as she's turned away from the door towards where her dead dog was found. We know this because when they conducted the forensic examination, they were able to actually track the gunshots that were in there. Mr. Maloney documented and confirmed that there were at least 12 shots through the wall to the right of the front door from a shooting position that would not be visible. In other words, a position where whoever's firing that weapon at that rate of fire would not be able to see anything Regina Nicholas was doing, much less wrestling with a police officer for a shotgun. This particular bullet that was at least initially suspected to be the fatal bullet that was left unrecovered during the period of time that the Houston Police Department and whatever forensic examiners they chose to have there. We also know at this point, and this is where our family focus is most directed, that why that house was chosen and how it was chosen, but more important, why in the world would an officer feel confident enough to swear to the existence of a drug sale? Why would this particular officer feel comfortable enough to swear that there was a drug sale with a non-existent confidential informant? And we know that at the time, the city and its command staff were very emphatic that this was the right house, that there had been an actual purchase of heroin in this heroin drug house that was feared by the neighbors. That, like any police organization, the Houston Police Department has rules about documentation of information provided by confidential informants. Those are done because if you're going to do it ethically consistent with legitimate police standards, there should never be a situation where you're trying to figure out who was the confidential informant that justified going in front of a judge and swearing that there was criminal activity before you knock down the door and start shooting. We know that if the police department, which they clearly had access to, had no documentation, there was no confidential informant, there was no documented evidence of a heroin sale at that location in the file from Gerald Goins before he went there, there would be no reason for, in this case, as we now know from an affidavit of Officer Bass, one of the investigators, for a scramble. At the same time, the command staff was telling all of us here in Houston and the world that this was a confirmed drug house, and we promised there was a reason to be there, for them to be scrambling around to identify a confidential informant. Lieutenant Marshal Todd and the other members of the command staff knew full well that it was their responsibility to make sure that that was the case. What this obviously raises is not just troubling questions about what was happening in this case and how easy it was for Gerald Goins to do what he did in this case, but how long and how many other Houstonians have been affected by this kind of conduct. That bullet that was left unrecovered that tracks it with the firing position outside the house is the same blood match with DNA that was confirmed for Ms. Regina Nicholas.
Attorneys for Regina Nicholas claim the bullet that killed her was left behind by forensic investigators after the botched raid on Harding Street. They say Nicholas was killed sitting on her couch.
It's a shame you're sitting in your house, minding your own business, and somebody shoots you.
Attorneys claim the bullet that killed Nicholas was among nearly 10 left behind by investigators. We reached out to the Houston Forensic Science Center, the agency responsible for processing the scene. In a statement, CEO and President Dr. Peter Stout wrote, HFSC has conducted a thorough investigation that included collecting fired evidence and documenting the scene in its entirety. HFSC cannot comment on the investigation of an external party, nor can it provide information on the evidence HFSC collected and its findings, since they are all related to an active investigation. An honest description of what really happened is all Regina's family wants.
All I want is the truth, some kind of closure. Hope this don't happen again.
Reka and Len, the DA, says that both Gerald Goins and Stephen Bryant lied on government records. She says that Goins lied about drug buys happening at the Harding Street home in order to obtain this no-knock search warrant. She says it was during this search warrant that officers from HPD Narcotics Squad number 15 shot and killed Dennis Tuttle and Regina Nicholas. Now, OGG says that her office is pouring over 14,000 cases from Squad number 15, closely scrutinizing the work by Goins, which a grand jury will also soon start examining. She says her office never saw the no-knock warrant after it was signed by a judge. And she says Goins' intent was to deceive Houston police investigators, supervisors, and the public.
Investigates dug up some serious questions about the police work of Gerald Goins throughout his entire career.
But Jeremy Rogalski says Houston police didn't catch the warning signs. Jeremy.
Well, Reka, records show a pattern of red flags in some of the cases filed by Gerald Goins, but despite those, HPD's higher up routinely said he was doing an outstanding job.
Long before the deadly Harding Street drug raid, we found a paper trail of sloppy police work by Gerald Goins. In one drug case, a prosecutor wrote Officer Goins never showed with search warrant after requesting for months. Another complained been waiting for months for officers to update the offense report. Still has not been done. KHOU 11 Investigates reviewed more than 100 search warrant cases filed by former Officer Goins. 20% of those were dismissed for evidence issues or no probable cause. In 12% of the warrant cases, records show police did not find the drugs they were looking for. Yet despite the red flags in the career of Gerald Goins, Houston police regularly praise the veteran cop, writing outstanding twice a year for more than a dozen years on his job performance reviews.
Two suspects were struck by return gunfire by members of the Houston Police Department. Those suspects, once we were able to render the scene safe by SWAT, were pronounced deceased at the scene from the return gunfire from the officers. Because there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there and people are going, running rampant. Let me just say this, we never run away from the truth.
We have an officer who has been relieved, but we certainly don't want anyone to read too far into something like this. There are officers that get relieved of duty, and then they come back to work with no discipline whatsoever.
We know we've had a criminal violation already, and serious criminal violation by the individual that prepared that affidavit.
You allowed cops to go in and shoot two innocent people.
The no-knock warrant's going to be going away as kind of like leaded gasoline in our city. And so you're going to see some changes very quickly.
I knew it wasn't true about the drug house.
How did you know?
I just know.
It's first-degree murder. We call that felony murder. Today, we charge Gerald Goins with 2 counts of felony murder. I've not seen a case like this in my 30-plus years of practicing law.
That was Aug last Friday, just after announcing criminal charges against the narcotics officer at the heart of the raid.
Today, we charge Gerald Goins with 2 counts of felony murder.
Felony murder charges against a now retired Houston Police Department narcotics officer, a move you don't see often. According to data from Stinson's group, since 2005, 107 police officers have been arrested for murder or manslaughter in a case where the officer shot and killed someone. But the Harding Street case stands out even more so, since Gerald Goins did not fire the deadly shots.
Members of Goins' own squad shot and killed Regina Nicholas, Dennis Tuttle, and their dog.
This puts Goins in very small company. Only a handful of officers have faced similar charges, according to Stinson. And out of the 107 cases total since 2005, only 4 officers have been convicted.
These are not easy cases for prosecutors to obtain convictions, but it's more likely that a conviction would be obtained given the nature of the charge in this case.
Harris County prosecutors continue to build their case with the key question of motive still unclear. This said, Chief Art Acevedo will not back down from his assertion that officers had a right to enter the Harding Street home. We asked him again last Friday, hours after the murder charges were filed.
I stand by that. We had probable cause to be there.
I will tell you at this time, the probable cause that was used to obtain the search warrant was false.
Should they have been in the home?
Not based on the warrant they had.
But just minutes after making his position on probable cause quite clear, the chief also acknowledged dishonesty to the court will ruin a case.
You just don't get to lie to the court. You don't get to lie in court documents. It throws everything out.
They had a warrant that was based on false information. And so the forced entry into that home was based on a lie.
So what really happened during that deadly botched raid 9 months ago on Harding Street? There are still many questions about this case. Did Dennis Tuttle, in fact, shoot at officers as they came into the house? Did he even fire a single shot? And were police officers hit by police officers?
Tonight, a private forensic investigator is talking exclusively with Channel 2 investigator Mario Diaz after reviewing official records and securing his own evidence.
These are all bullets and bullet fragments that we recovered from the scene.
It's been over 6 months since forensic investigator Michael Maloney first stepped inside 7815 Harding Street. Hired by the families of Dennis Tuttle and Regina Nicholas, his mission far from simple: discovering the truth.
This was very surprising for a scene that had been already processed.
Maloney is a decorated forensic investigator with nearly 30 years of experience. During his visit to the home in May, he reconstructed bullet trajectories and carefully examined the inside of the now infamous home where HPD narcotics officers carried out the deadly botched raid.
I knew where he spent his final moments as he lay dying, and his teeth were still there. How do you come in and process a scene and leave part of the victim lying on the floor in a puddle of blood?
After spending 4 days last spring focused on discovering the truth, Maloney is now talking.
This one most likely drops him to the ground.
Last week, Channel 2 Investigates traveled to Missouri to speak with Maloney in his first interview regarding his investigation and what it has produced thus far.
Does the narrative, in your opinion, from what you've heard from HPD, match up in any way?
No, it doesn't.
One of the biggest discoveries, the round Maloney says killed Regina Nicholas, also has the DNA of Dennis Tuttle on it.
I was very surprised when it ended up having a minor contributor of Dennis Tuttle. I was also very pleased because it allows us to then position Dennis Tuttle at some point during the dynamic shooting event.
The wound reveals not only where Tuttle was inside the home, but also the view an HPD officer had when he fired the shot.
What we have to realize is that this bullet is fired from outside of the house. There's not a view inside of the house. Regina Nichols is shot blind. That means Tuttle was shot, at least by that grazing wound across his forearm, blind as well. They didn't see him.
They didn't see him.
Not for that shot.
At the time of death, Tuttle weighed only 112 pounds. He had his right hand bandaged and a leg in a brace. However, HPD says he was still capable of hitting 4 trained officers after surprising him with a no-knock warrant.
Have you discovered anything that shows you that Mr. Tuttle fired off a round?
I have not discovered any evidence that he's fired off a round, nor has any evidence been made available to me that would indicate that he fired.
As for friendly fire, it's important to know what HPD Chief R. Acevedo said hours after former narcotics officer Gerald Goins was charged with 2 counts of murder.
I stand by our investigation, and I can tell you there's no evidence of friendly fire in this case.
It's easy to say there's absolutely no indication of friendly fire. But for transparency's sake, when you have such a debacle at the doorway, with shots raining in against the house that aren't being aimed at individuals but are just shooting a structure and everything else, you would think that rather than just state there is no evidence, we would see that evidence.
You view this as a complete debacle?
I believe I'm completely justified in viewing it as a debacle.
But this is the first time that we're hearing about Patricia Garcia.
Yes, according to the indictment, she is the Harding Street neighbor whose 911 calls led police officers to the home to begin with.
And we've been learning a lot more about this woman who lives here in this neighborhood. Going through that federal indictment, it alleges that Patricia Garcia made multiple calls to 911 claiming that there were drugs and guns, that her daughter was inside of this home. We do know that she was arrested earlier this morning at the house right across the street from it. I did speak with the homeowner's son, though, and he tells me that they do not want to be associated with her. On January 8th, this dispatch audio describes a 911 call that Houston police say set in motion a spiral of events.
Daughter is at the location. She possibly thinks there's drugs, guns inside the residence. She wants to remain anonymous.
That alleged caller no longer anonymous. This morning, federal agents arrested 53-year-old Patricia Garcia. The indictment alleges that Garcia gave false and misleading information in multiple 911 calls, claiming that her daughter was inside of the home and the residents were addicts, drug dealers, and had machine guns. This morning, Garcia was arrested at the house directly across the street from the deadly raid that left Regina Nicholas and Dennis Tuttle dead. But Tommy Arce says she doesn't live here.
I don't want us to be associated with Pat at all because this is the anti-residence.
Arce says Garcia has dated his father for a year and stays here occasionally but lives several houses down. He says he was shocked to learn of her arrest because his family was close friends with Regina and Dennis.
2 police officers and a civilian who called 911 are facing federal charges tonight.
There's a reason we were there, and that will all come out in due time, all the specifics.
This was HPD Chief Art Acevedo in the hours after 9 federal counts were slapped against former HPD narcotics officers Gerald Goins and Stephen Bryant. Patricia Garcia, a neighbor who lived across the street from 7815 Harding Street, also charged over the alleged lies and unlawful actions before and after the January 28th raid. Goins is accused of lying to build his case and obtaining a warrant, which is why the violation of constitutional rights is such a huge charge.
She wants to remain anonymous, advised of this location. There's possibly doing drugs and guns inside the residence.
However, it is the indictment of Garcia for allegedly faking a 911 call on January the 8th that also is intriguing, considering the call is what launched an alleged investigation that led to the raid.
She is the reason why this notion, junkies and heroin addicts and that Harding Street residence is basically a fairy tale.
7 counts against Gerald Goins. It's alleged Goins, the case agent, lied about everything from the confidential informant who allegedly purchased black tar heroin from the home of Dennis Tuttle and Regina Nicholas to filing a false police report and violating the Tuttles' constitutional rights by entering their home on fake intel. Goins also faces 2 counts of felony murder in state criminal court. 1 count for Stephen Bryant, who was released on a $50,000 unsecured bond. He has entered a not guilty plea. Bryant is accused of lying about previously investigating the Tuttle home, claiming he had seen the heroin Goins reported was purchased from the home the day before the raid. And 1 count for Patricia Ann Garcia, the new name here, accused of calling 911 multiple times, claiming her daughter was in the house, which contained drugs and guns. Her case key because it provides context as to how we got here in the first place.
Police officers have been engaged in misconduct since the advent of time. We had an officer lie about his actions that led up to the issuing of a warrant. And for that, I apologize to that family.
Patricia Ann Garcia is accused of making those calls, now believed to be full of lies.
I don't know if she was mad at the people or if they were fighting.
The 52-year-old lives with her parents a few houses down from the Tuttles. Her boyfriend lives across the street, and residents say she often threatened to call the police on Regina for no good reason. According to the indictment, on January 8th, Garcia claimed her 25-year-old daughter was inside the home and doing drugs. Her father and the feds say none of it was true.
And she was with me when all that happened, and then she got called to court down there and all that, saying that my ex-wife had said that her daughter was there or something, but she wasn't even there.
The investigation showed the Tuttles were not dangerous drug dealers or gun runners. Far from it. They were well liked on the street and had lived here for years. Neighbors say Garcia was a troublemaker. Her parents did not answer the door. Lots of questions about regret and motive remain.
It's time that the family had an opportunity to speak.
Cliff Tuttle, the uncle of Dennis Tuttle, can stay silent no more. He is not alone.
Me and my mama would like to know why they went there.
John Nicholas, the older brother of Regina Nicholas, also is speaking out.
The big cities are supposed to be professionals when it comes to this stuff.
For Cliff Tuttle, the findings by Maloney translates to a quick demise for Dennis and Regina.
Do you think about what went through their minds at that moment?
It happened so fast, nothing went through his mind. That happened so fast. Just no time to react. No time to look at your wife and say, I love you.
How much faith do you have in the investigation, considering that everything the private investigator hired by the families has discovered on his own thus far?
I don't really. They hiding it. They covering up. I guess that's the right word. It's some kind of cover up for some reason.
The families are calling for transparency from HPD.
We'd like to get the ballistics report. We can then determine who did what, why they did it, and move forward.
Do you think your family will ever get the truth?
No, we're not trash. Dennis was not trash. We've been painted as trash.
It's been almost a year since a Houston couple was killed in a shootout with police during a botched drug raid inside their home on Harding Street.
To us and to our community, this is the most important case going on in the country.
The home at the center of the Houston police botched drug raid on Harding Street last January was once again taped off Wednesday morning by authorities. A large white tent covered the driveway, and around 10:15 a.m., a large black bus pulled up and dropped off a group of people. Their identities are unknown, but members of the Harris County District Attorney's Office were on the scene.
The aftermath of the botched, deadly Houston police raid on Harding Street last year, prosecutors started reviewing more than 1,400 criminal cases tied to ex-police officer Gerald Goins.
And one man who was previously convicted on the former officer's testimony now wants his conviction thrown out. He says Goins lied in court and withheld evidence.
Yeah, this is just one of thousands of cases tied to Gerald Goins now under review in the wake of the Harding Street raid.
Yeah, Goins came to court briefly today in connection with a man he arrested 12 years ago. That man contending that Goins' perjured testimony at his trial caused him to be wrongfully convicted. Otis Mallett contends former Houston officer Gerald Goins lied during Mallett's 2011 trial to convince a jury to convict Mallett on a drug charge that sent him to prison for 2 years. He's still on parole. That was more than a decade before Goins was charged with murder and civil rights violations in the botched Harding Street drug raid last January. Mallett and his attorneys also contend that Goins withheld evidence in the case that would have aided his defense. And this time, the Harris County DA agrees with them.
We agree that false testimony was given by Gerald Goins in the trial of Mr. Mallett back in 2008. We also agree that he failed to disclose relevant evidence.
Specifically, Mallett's lawyers say Goins lied about paying Mallett $200 to buy crack cocaine, and also didn't reveal that he'd paid a confidential informer who led him to Mallett, information that might have aided the defense. Goins was subpoenaed to testify this morning but didn't appear, his lawyer explaining that he'd undergone surgery Wednesday for injuries received in the Harding Street raid. When the judge insisted he appear this afternoon, he came to court bandaged just long enough to plead the fifth. Prosecutors support Mallett's request to overturn his conviction but say they need more time to consider whether he should be declared actually innocent. The hearing will reconvene February 3rd to take up that issue.
Mallett hopes to recover his good name, if not all the time spent in prison.
But we do really appreciate the court giving us the time today to prove that Mr. Mallett is actually innocent of this crime.
His case goes back the farthest out of the thousands that are now under review, thanks to Gerald Goins' involvement.
And during today's court hearing, a prosecutor looked at Mr. Mallett and told him, quote, "I'm sorry, you deserve better." Although the DA's office at the time of his trial thought all of the information was factual based on what Goins said.
Right now at 10, breaking news. After months of pleas for transparency, Houston police finally releases its audit following the botched and deadly raid on Harding Street back in 2019.
A big focus of the audit shows a glaring lack of supervision, especially involving these fired officers, Gerald Goins and Stephen Bryant, in their cases from January of 2016 through January of 2019. In that 3-year span, Houston police audited a total of 231 narcotics cases, and according to the audit, out of the 84 cases where Goins was the primary case agent, 38% used confidential informants for controlled buys, and 36% of the controlled buys yielded search warrants. Now, as for Bryant, out of 147 cases, 63% used confidential informants for controlled buys, and 20% of the controlled buys yielded search warrants. Bryant also assisted Goins in 27% of the cases.
Now, the audit shows of those 231 investigations, there were 404 errors. Breaking down those errors, Goins failed to tag drugs before the end of his shift 48% of the time. He missed case review sheets 29% of the time. There were discrepancies in his expense reports 27% of the time. He failed to complete a tactical plan 25% of the time, and 23% of his cases had tracking errors.
Bryant missed case review sheets 31% of the time. He failed to turn in a case file 18% of the time, and he was late to enter tracking information 16% of the time. Bryant had case tracking errors 10% of the time, and 10% failed to show thoroughness of investigation.
District Attorney described it as an ongoing scheme, something that had been happening for years, in which high-level narcotics officers and their supervisors essentially repeatedly lied and stole from the taxpayer.
Warrants have now issued for 6 former HPD narcotics officers in total.
15 new criminal charges for 6 former HPD narcotics officers, all but one members of Narcotics Squad 15, including Gerald Goins and Stephen Bryant, who have already been charged in the botched deadly Harding Street raid in 2019. Plus 3 supervisors on the team, including a lieutenant, as well as a senior police officer with another squad. These officers, the district attorney said, worked together to repeatedly lie on government documents and illegally collecting thousands of dollars in confidential informant payouts. In addition to that, the officers are accused of stealing unearned overtime pay. The motive for all of it, the district attorney said, was money. An ongoing scheme that was only investigated as a result of the deadly raid that left Regina Nicholas and husband Dennis Tuttle dead in their home. Prosecutors are now reviewing thousands of cases connected to Narcotics Squad 15.
Now, the Houston Police Officers Union issuing a scathing statement against District Attorney Kim Ogg after she announced new charges against additional former officers, saying, quote, "It does not take 18 months to investigate a tampering with a government document case. This is simply a distraction from the repeated failures of her office and continued negative attention, which she seemingly invites on a daily basis.
I go to a developing story now. 521 days after a deadly botched raid in southeast Houston, more charges have been filed against the officers involved.
Those charges come as we're getting a look at an in-depth audit of the HPD Narcotics Division behind that deadly raid.
Channel 2's Brandon Walker leads off our team coverage tonight, live on Harding Street.
And Dominique, that audit is spanning some 3 years, concluding the night of the deadly shooting. It recommends some supervisory changes to oversight there, also changes to the role confidential informants play in police investigations, as well as policy changes to search warrants and how they're implemented. But critics say that the audit falls short, way short.
My question is, if that's true, why did it take HPD and the DA's office as long as it did for them to uncover something that they now maintain was systemic?
Thousands of cases to be reviewed now, connected to Narcotics Squad 15.
But it is serious because it strikes at the very heart of what we count on in the criminal justice system to produce fair trials and reliable results.
Yesterday, we learned that the corruption was not limited to just a few officers, and definitely not one officers, but it was possibly the entire division. This audit says that there were hundreds of violations in just a handful of cases, only going back 2 years. Bryant and Goins may have stolen tens of thousands of dollars of taxpayers' money. But what the report does not say is why. Why did these problems happen? It doesn't speak to the systemic problems that led to the deaths of Dennis Tuttle and Regina Nichols. The report does not talk about how HPD brass, what they will do to fix this in the future. It only talks about what the people at the bottom did. It only talks about how they will control the people at the bottom, not the supervision, not the oversight of what happened with HPD. I now know why Chief Acevedo has been hiding this report, because it's a joke. It's just a cover for him to say, well, we did enough. We took care of it, it's fine. But in fact, the report tells us it's not fine. It doesn't say what they're gonna do at the command level to fix this problem and prevent this from ever happening again.
About a document HPD dropped last night via Twitter at 8:04 p.m. An internal audit of the department's narcotics division.
The report said that it may be the entire department that was rogue. But what the report does not say is why.
As in, what's the source of the problem? The report, some 66 pages long and released with redactions, centers its focus on the two officers prosecutors allege were central to the botched raid that killed Regina Nichols and Dennis Tuttle, former HPD officers Gerald Goins and Stephen Bryant. But how the problem happened in the first place from the top down? Wu says that answer is key and missing.
It could have happened to any one of us. These people had nothing to do with what was going on, and they were innocent victims.
In part because HPD audited itself, critics say. State Representative Wu and State Senator Paul Betancourt say they plan to file bipartisan legislation that tackles audits or the public's right to know.
You have an audit like this, it should be released to the public. I also checked in with former HPOU President Ray Hunt. He believes that it all should be released.
At a press conference Thursday, Mayor Sylvester Turner commended HPD, he says, for taking a critical look within.
They didn't wait for somebody to say do it. They did it, so let's acknowledge that.
$4.1 million in CARES Act funding the city received will pay for 110 extra officers to patrol every day. Those hotspots, the West Side, Midwest, South Gessner, South Central, Southeast, and North Belt divisions.
As for those extra officers on the street, they'll be there until the end of the year.
The Harris County DA announced new charges ranging from one officer charged in the death of Dennis Tuttle to charges for organized crime. Those charges stem from aggregate theft and tampering with government documents. The district attorney says the officers were involved in a scheme to steal money and overtime from the city of Houston.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. We'll go ahead and get started with this press conference. Obviously, we're here today to address the charges that were brought down yesterday, actually the indictments. The We were really surprised when those came out. We did not expect that to go down that way with Felipe Gallegos being charged with murder. That is something that we just feel is inappropriate, and the officer went in that day to work to do his job. And in reality, he should be receiving an award of valor. Instead, today he's posting a bond to keep his freedom. And what we're witnessing today is the death of proactive police work. I mean, seriously, when you go out, you work hard, you do your job, and you get charged with felony indictments. It's a sad day in Harris County. But I want to make no mistake about it. Some of the things that DA Ogg said yesterday is just not factually accurate. Number one is she made the comment that the Tuttles are innocent, ordinary people. If the citizens of Harris County consider having narcotics in their home and shooting police officers average and normal, then we have bigger problems than I expected. That is not average and not normal. These officers went out there that day, and yes, Gerald Goings lied to get an affidavit. He's dealing with his own issues, but that had nothing to do with the rest of the officers on that scene that day that performed to the highest level possible to protect the citizens of Houston. They did their job to the best of their ability. One officer, Sadell Lovings, will never walk again because of the actions that were taken that day in that house. 4 of our officers were shot by Mr. Tuttle, and there is absolutely no rationale behind that. We are hoping that we get a quick day in court for our officers. And understand, these officers, Sadell Lovings, Frank Medina, and the others, not only are they good officers, they're true friends of mine. In reality, only 3 people have been charged in an investigation that the DA's office spent a year and a half on, and all they come up with is irregularities in overtime slips. They spent millions of taxpayer dollars to hire extra investigators just to go over this case, and all they come up with is irregularities in overtime? Seriously? That's a waste of our taxpayer dollars. We can't even get the DA to stack charges on gang members, yet they're going to stack charges on our officers. But as far as the 3 charged criminally with the raid itself, Gerald Goings, Bryant, and now Felipe Gallegos. Felipe Gallegos had nothing to do with the other 2. So I believe that this is a stretch by this DA. I expect that our attorneys, the attorneys that we hired for each of these individuals, will do a phenomenal job. And these cases will turn out just like those that the DA's office has prosecuted before when the winds say you should prosecute. There's plenty of things that the DA's office obviously gets wrong. This is one that she has overreached, overstepped, and our officers are going to be proven innocent at the end of the day. We look forward to our day in court, and I see them coming back to work one day after all these cases are dismissed and being productive members of our organization. It is nothing more than TV justice at its best.
2 years since that botched HPD raid on Harding Street. And in those 2 years, there have been a lot of developments. Just this week, 6 more Houston police officers were indicted, which makes 12 indictments altogether. And Robert, 2 years later, the families are not satisfied with this investigation.
The families of Dennis Tuttle and Regina Nicholas say they still do not have all the answers as to exactly what happened during this botched raid, and their fight is now in federal court in the form of this lawsuit.
There remain so many questions unanswered, so many facts that have been concealed and continue to be concealed, the answers that they refuse to give to the basic facts about what happened before, during, and probably most important, after the attack by this squad.
Regina Nicholas's brother John says the entire ordeal has been particularly hard on their 86-year-old mother.
But I was sitting there with my mama, and tears come to their eyes, saying she wasn't a scumbag.
The family and their attorney argue HPD's problems go far deeper than the 12 current and former officers charged in this investigation. Former officer Gerald Goings is accused of using bogus information to get the warrant that led to the raid. Other officers are accused of tampering with evidence and stealing overtime. This week, Officer Felipe Gallegos was charged with murder for his role in the raid. Gallegos claims he was defending himself and fellow officers by returning fire. Mayor Sylvester Turner also defends HPD, saying the actions of a few should not taint the many.
I think you have to be very careful before you draw any conclusions on it. And so allow the process to run its course.
Many civil rights and police reform activists also say what happened at Harding Street further highlights the need for outside oversight.
We need a civilian investigative board with subpoena power.
And this federal lawsuit also accuses HPD of a lack of oversight, allowing problem officers to go unchecked.
Also breaking overnight, Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo is leaving Houston for South Florida.
After 4.5 years with our city, Chief Acevedo is leaving to take over the Miami Police Department.
The CEO of Crime Stoppers tweeted, Chief Art Acevedo has been this city's strongest advocate for public safety. Refusing to bend to politics, he puts citizens first. His time was not without controversy. There were calls for his resignation after the botched raid on Harding Street in 2019. 2 people killed and 12 officers charged.
Chief Acevedo says this opportunity wasn't planned, that it just sort of happened.
And Grace, a lot of people were surprised by this news.
It's a move that surprised even the head of the police union. The president telling us he only got a 30-minute heads up about the chief's departure.
We're a little shocked by that. I didn't see that coming.
Union President Douglas Griffith says he is yet to talk directly to Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo. But keep in mind, Acevedo was born in Cuba, so the move brings him closer to home.
Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our new chief, Art Acevedo.
His salary, according to our CBS station in Miami, $315,000 a year. That's up from $295,000 in Houston.